Now I'm turning to questions that I've received from the audience. And one touches on an issue that you've already mentioned, and that is the difficulty of resurrecting evidence 20, 25, 30 years after the event. One particular concern when you're dealing with government offices is what we in the United States call state secrets. That is, the government, if an officer is being sued, the government's answer may be, this person can't defend himself or herself because the defense would reveal classified information, state secrets. If the information came out, it would endanger the lives of others. Do you have in your systems something comparable to the notion of state secrets that cannot be revealed and introduced into evidence?
We do. I'll take the floor first. We do, but this government has already sent the resolutions to the defense minister that there are a lot of things that were classified as military or state secrets that were not. So they were lifting this secret just to provide the court with the documents related to this military dictatorship, because they say this is not endangering the state at all. It's only to protect and to be accomplices to these men, perpetrators of these crimes against humanity. So we'll lift the secret of these documents, and that's the government who said through the Minister of Defense, but it was the government implied in all these terms to facilitate prosecution and justice in the end.
Did the judges themselves inspect the documents to determine whether they were properly labeled state secret?
I don't know yet, but they are starting. At least they have started to do it. But I don't know if in every case should need to review the documents or whatever. They are at the disposition of the courts. Let's see what is going to happen. I don't know.
Do we have responses, Judge Cerda?
Okay. Sí, desde mi punto de vista, y creo que en esto represento el sentir de una cierta cultura jurídica nacional, la teoría del secreto de Estado pone en jaque a la justicia democrática o a la justicia en una democracia. ¿Por qué?
I think, from my point of view, and I think I represent the feeling of our national juridical culture, that the state secrets legislation puts justice in peril in a democracy.
Porque la justicia en una democracia propia de un Estado de Derecho está sobre todo para defender a las minorías.
Because justice that is appropriate to a democracy and life under the rule of law, justice should be made to defend the rights of minorities.
De manera que nadie, cualquiera sea la clase de minoría de que se esté hablando, sienta el desamparo de sus derechos esenciales frente a los actos del Estado.
No one should feel unprotected, that their basic essential rights are unprotected against the state.
Si no es capaz el Poder Judicial de garantizar la defensa de los derechos esenciales cuando se acusa al Estado de desconocerlos o violarlos, entonces se acarrea la inseguridad en el más propio de sus sentidos.
I think if the judicial branch is not able to guarantee the defense of the essential rights of the people versus the state, then the whole democracy is in peril.
Es fácil para el Estado amparar sus actos bajo el pretexto del secreto de Estado.
It's easy for the state to take cover for their actions under the state secrets banner.
Actualmente la Constitución chilena ha sido modificada. Digo actualmente en un periodo, no sé si alcanzó a cumplirse ya un año, algo así. Y se estableció la publicidad de todas las actuaciones de los órganos del Estado.
Right now, and I'm talking about a year ago, the Chilean Constitution was modified, and one of those modifications was the public nature of all state actions.
Es este un triunfo más de la democracia
This is another triumph for democracy.
que permite a los jueces siempre hurgar en las causas y motivos de cualquier acto, incluso del Estado.
But that it allows the judges to be able to get into any kind of causes or evidence of the state, in actions against the
Esto
state.
favorece la transparencia,
This is in favor of transparency,
contribuye a evitar la corrupción
contributes in the avoidance of corruption in government,
y sobre todo hace que el pueblo, la gente, sienta que a través de los tribunales puede enfrentarse en términos de igualdad al Estado.
and it also contributes above all to people feeling that when they have to go up in a court against the state, that they can be in equal footing.
Subsiste, y con esto termino, Justice
This
Ginsburg,
will be my last point.
hay en la judicatura militar una norma especial de resguardo para actos que tienen que ver, que están relacionados, no sé usar la terminología exacta porque no me acuerdo en qué término está redactada la disposición, pero tiene que ver, digo, con actos de soberanía. Allí se establece cierta reserva.
There's a certain reserve in the military system having to do with acts related to sovereignty.
Estamos viviendo en estos momentos una determinación del límite, de border, en esta temática con la nueva disposición constitucional.
We are right now currently living through some kind of negotiation about what the limits are of this protection in the military courts for acts committed in the name of sovereignty.
Pero puedo decir que, puesto que me corresponde dirigir una investigación en que en cierto modo están concernidos dineros que pudo haberse obtenido en actos de obtención de armas para el país,
Because right now I'm investigating a case involving monies having to do with the purchase of arms for the country.
potential form.
Potential.
Yeah, that's
Potential.
possible. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
I nothing say about. Yeah, without
Alleged,
conclusions. yeah?
Alleged,
So,
yes.
so in this level, I have been a total collaboration from the state.
Alleged.
I think some of the students might be interested in understanding that your role, you are a judge, but you are an examining magistrate. That is, you are not listening to a case to determine the guilt or innocence of the defendant, but you are taking the place of what a grand jury would do in the United States to determine whether there is enough evidence to put this person on trial. And that's a kind of a judge that we do not have in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a question let me read it to you. It says, taking account of the adverse effects on justice and the victims of not calling people to account for crimes against humanity, for government abuses. There's also a concern about giving the government an incentive to step down, to have the bad actors leave. And do you see a role for impunity laws or promises of amnesty? That is, if you step down and go off to the Riviera and never return again, you won't be prosecuted.
No, esa alternativa yo creo que está descartada en Chile.
I think we will not use that alternative in Chile.
Nosotros no tenemos el sistema de un posible arreglo entre un prosecutor fiscal y un defensor.
No, we don't have a kind of plea system where we would make a deal with a defendant.
Tampoco existe en Chile el sistema de una suerte de premio o beneficio o privilegio por la colaboración en el proceso.
We also do not have the kind of prize or benefit of somebody who will collaborate with the process, a cooperating individual.
Entonces, cualquiera sea la actitud que asuma un imputado, inculpado o acusado, igualmente puede ser llevado a juicio de condena o absolución, un debido proceso de derecho.
Whatever attitude the accused takes or his response, he can still be taken to a trial which will end either in him being being imposed a sentence or him being absolved.
Y agradezco mucho la pregunta porque, claro, en este trabajo, Justice Ginsburg y público en general, uno conoce al ser humano que no obstante imputado de graves conductas es tan rico como todo ser humano. Y uno debe tener conciencia de aquello, que no está contra alguien, sino que está en favor de establecer con ese alguien, ojalá, la verdad sobre la cual y únicamente sobre la cual puede hacerse justicia con miras a la paz social.
I'm grateful for your question, Justice Ginsburg. I think in our work we are very familiar with the human condition, and even people who come before us accused and how precious each person is. We are not having a case against someone. We're trying to establish the truth of something and how that someone was involved. And this is the only way that we can do justice, so it brings about a social peace.
Y entonces no es infrecuente encontrarse con un imputado arrepentido, que él mismo ha cambiado su vida, no obstante lo cual, responsable que sea de un acto así establecido en el debido proceso, condenado es.
It's not infrequent that we have people come before us who maybe have changed their lives, who have repented for their deeds, but no matter how, if they are responsible and would be able to establish that they were responsible for violations and give them their due process, they will be imposed a sentence, found guilty and imposed a sentence.
Y termino, Justice Ginsburg, perdone la extensión.
I'm sorry I went on.
Ese también es un chileno, es un latinoamericano, es un ciudadano del mundo, también lo era Augusto Pinochet Ugarte, y cuando dije que en paz descanse lo digo con toda sinceridad. Lo interrogué, estuve fuera del proceso tomando té con él en su casa y tratando de descubrirnos ambos. Él como el imputado, culpable y bien yo lo sabía de conductas que no deben ser aceptadas no solo por el derecho, sino por la cultura en general, por la historia. y yo como aquel que tal vez iba a pasar a la historia como quien había de juzgarlo. Qué pequeñez de ambos y qué grandeza de ambos. ¿Por qué? Porque en razón de lo que exige justamente esa verdad y esa justicia, dos personas compartían un momento de sus vidas.
Because even Augusto Pinochet Ugarte, and when I said may he rest in peace, I did mean that honestly. He was a Chilean, he was a human being, he was a citizen of the world. Even though I had interrogated him, I also sat down with him for tea. He was the accused, guilty of acts that are unacceptable to humanity, history, and our culture. But in order to judge him, I really needed to find where the truth lied, and this led to a better understanding of what had gone on.
Thank you, Judge Cerda. Now we have a question that's specifically directed to Mónica Feria, which is, could you tell us about the early experiences in your life that led to your resolve to become a lawyer?
Thank you for the question. I would say that I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I became 12. Yes. Why? I grew up in the midst of a dictatorship in my country. We had a dictatorship, a military dictatorship for some time. And I realized as a little girl that we didn't have really liberties. And I witnessed, when I was coming back from school, some demonstrations. There was a very long strike in 1977 of workers, of teachers, and it was a very difficult time for Peru. And I felt that I wanted to do something about justice. I didn't like the feeling of injustice, even in my little world at school. And it appeared that I was a good advocate of some of my colleagues in front of the teachers. Somehow convinced the teachers that maybe you should give a hearing to that person. And I thought that I could do that. And my resolve then came from when I was 12. It never occurred to me that as a woman in Peru, from an Andean kind of background, that would be a challenge. It never occurred to me it would be a challenge to enter to university. I just knew I wanted to do that in my life, and I'm quite glad I decided that.
Thank you. And now I have a question directed to Justice Argibay, and I'm curious to hear your answer because it's a question I've been often asked. It is, did the women judges on the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia contribute to the court's jurisprudence in a way that differed from the contributions of the male judges? And if so, what were those contributions? Could you give us some examples?
Well, thank you, Justice Ginsburg. The ICTY is an experience very dear to my heart, so I like very much talking about that. And I can say that sometimes perhaps it's not so easy to see it in the jurisprudence of the tribunal, but that the contribution of the women judges is very important. Everybody has recognized that. And I can tell you that in the trials, at the hearings, it is very noticeable that sometimes the women judges are more attentive to the needs of the witnesses or the persons, especially the victims who are taking the stand, and telling the presiding judge sometimes, that usually it's a man, please make a break. And when you make a break, you say, what's happening? You need to give the witness a little rest because he's too emotional, that sort of things. And with the translator, the interpreters, because they were from the former Yugoslavia, most of them, they were speaking the two languages, of course, the languages of the defendants and the witnesses, and the languages of the tribunal. So it's their history, their place, their families, their war. In 20 minutes, they could break down 20 times, listening to the people telling their stories. So they are repeating their stories as translators. So they break down easily. I know they're heavy smokers. I'm a smoker, but they are heavy smokers. So I usually put a note to my presiding judge. It was a Chinese judge. He was very gentle and very nice, but he never realized that. And I said, break. And so we went out, and he said, what's happening? Are you feeling ill? No, I'm not feeling ill. Having to listen to the translators, they were crying. So we need to break, to give them time to have a cigarette, a coffee, whatever, and recover. They're telling us their story. That's heart-wrenching, I can tell you. And that for the women judges, and for a lot of male judges also, sometimes you would like to hold the hand of the victim and say, I can understand you. And you know that in the bench, you have to have a straight face, because the lawyers for the defense are looking at the judges just to see any sign that you're sympathizing with the victim or with the witness or with the prosecutor or whatever. So they are looking at you every time, so you have to have this straight face. But then when you get to chambers and you start discussing what you've been hearing and listening to and seeing, because you're seeing a lot, corporal language, is very important. That makes a difference too. I remember talking with my first presiding judge, who was a German and very good too. And we have a case of one of the camp of concentrations in the northern part of Bosnia that were very similar to some of the German concentration camps in the Second World War. And there was a woman who was telling how she was raped by the chief of the person on charge of that concentration camp. And the prosecutors was presenting the case, and the defendant said, well, it's impossible, she's telling lies, because she's telling that one day it had happened, this thing had happened, and the next day the same thing had happened. It's impossible that she got so many clothes or so many things or something. And I remember talking with Ginsburg, that was my presiding judge, said, remember, she was raped every night since she was at the camp. But she remembers especially the first night. So for her, every other night was a sequence, a repetition, the same thing as the first day, exactly the same. Of course, she was not menaced with a knife all the nights, but perhaps all the first 3 or 4 or 5, probably she was menaced with a knife. So what happened is the 20th night, she was not, I'm going to say that was not rape at the time. And he was in agreement with me, but it takes a woman to talk about that. Because they didn't like to talk about that. So it was something that to accept that a woman could live something repeatedly, and the same thing, it occurs to her in the first time and the 20th time. And so she unifies the idea and can tell in one night whatever has happened in 20 nights. But that doesn't mean that she's lying. And Shamu understood that, and he had the sense of that. But it takes me to come and say, well, we discussed this. We're going to discuss this because the defendant is saying she is lying. So women judges make a difference. We can talk about a lot of things that male judges don't talk about if there's not a woman judge there. That's not easy for them to talk about women issues, crimes against women. It's not easy for them to talk about. But if there's a woman judge, then they can talk about. And then things go easily and much better, I think. Thank you.
This panel has been of such large interest, but it is getting past the witching hour. So I would just like to ask each of you if you have a piece of advice about becoming an effective professional, effective lawyer, that you would like to impart to the students who are here.
I'd like to say something. I think the best thing in any profession, any state of life, whatever, is to act honestly, on conviction, and with courage. And that's all. Thank you.
Piece of advice, I would say persistence is very important. It may take time to prepare your case, to plead your case, to go somewhere with a case, but if you persist and you have that commitment to make things happen, you will certainly go somewhere. And I think that will make a difference.
Judge Cerda, you have the last word.
Oh, qué desafío.
What a challenge.
Confianza en que el caso habla por sí solo si uno a él se acerca con total humildad.
To have the trust that the case will speak for itself if you approach it with total humility.
Thank you, Justice Ginsburg, Dean Alenikoff, Justice Argibay, Judge Cerda, and Ms. Feria. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us here today. One last round of applause for this year's Justice Prize recipients. Thank you.